Good evening. We are pleased to host tonight's discussion about choice, about the right of Solterra residents to have a choice on new taxes. This is a controversial issue, as are most issues involving taxes and the right to vote. But the issue is not personal. It is not about us. It is not about our RMD board members, who we heartily thank for their dedicated service to our community. Anticipating that we will hear differing opinions tonight, we ask that the conversation be respectful and courteous, keeping in mind that what we all want is what is best for our community. Our plan is to conclude the meeting in 1 hour. You will have the opportunity to ask questions at the conclusion of each speaker's 10-minute presentation and, time permitting, at the end of the presentations. Our speakers tonight are John Henderson and Gary Grieser. The Solterra Community Network was formed with one purpose: to get our right to vote on community debt reinstated. There are certainly other ways to accomplish this goal. At this time, with the board's refusal to put the issue to a vote of the community, their recent decision to issue new bonds, and their refusal to verify the actual amount of money we owe to Brookfield, we feel that a recall of every board member is the only option. Now, I'd like to briefly introduce our members. Victoria Hudson is a fifth-generation Colorado native who has loved living in Colorado for the last 5 years. Currently doing volunteer work, she spent many years as assistant to a senior partner in the litigation department of the law firm Holland & Hart. J.D. LeBou is a professional mental health counselor and an Agile coach. He's also a concerned Solterra resident who does not want us to continue to follow unconscionable contracts and agreements. Paul Tessar has worked as an IT professional for 40 years before retiring and moving to Solterra in 2014. His two most recent positions, he served as the Geographic Data Administrator for the City and County of Denver and for CDOT. He also served as president of the Walnut Hills Civic Association from '79 to '81. Dr. Alex Yaffa is a theoretical physicist. He got involved in special district abuse issues after seeing developers abuse the system for personal gain. Being a first-generation immigrant from a country where people's voices are suppressed or bought, he has firsthand knowledge of how devastating such practices are. I'm Linnea Hauser. I have a master's degree in leadership, and I spent the last 30 years of my career in higher education administration, most recently at DU. John Henderson has a master's in public administration and is also a lawyer. During the past 36 years as an attorney, he represented both developers and residents. For 40 years, he has advocated for residents on land use issues in Connecticut, Virginia, Kansas, and Colorado with no compensation. He has served as an officer and president for 2 HOAs in Virginia and Kansas. The past 3.5 years, he has advocated for Metro District reform in Colorado and has been recognized as an expert on Metro districts by the Denver Post, the City of Longmont, the City of Lakewood, and over a dozen resident groups throughout the Front Range who are working on Metro District reform in their communities. Gary Grieser's work spanned 45 years in the food industry, 32 years as a director level in purchasing, manufacturing, warehousing, information systems, and document management. Since moving to Solterra in 2010, Gary has been active in FRMD and was a board candidate in 2018. His relevant skill sets include certifications in project management, process improvement, applied financial analysis, activity-based costing, and purchasing. JD, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Linnea. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. As Linnea said, I just want to give you a few Zoom ground rules that we're using. We really want to make this as interactive as possible. And we also want to ensure that our presenters have the ability to present the information so that you can speak to it clearly and ask questions about it. After each presentation, there'll be a 10-minute Q&A pertinent to the information that has been shown. If you start to go off on other topics, we would please ask you to hold off, and I will cut you off and move you to a later session, which will be at the very end. We'll have about 20 minutes to do Q&A over whatever you want, and that's where it can be open. The way that you ask a question is very similar to the way you may have seen. In other words, you basically, under your participant tab, you can see there's a raise hand icon. If you don't know where that is, I can show you exactly where that is so that you understand where it is. Let me share my screen real quick for you. You'll see a little icon somewhere like this. I think you see it. Everybody see this participants? Thumbs up from whoever, if we can see it. Thank you very much, Kelly. So that is where you will be clicking on, and under there is a raise hand icon, basically like this. Once you click on that, it will notify me that you guys have a question, and I will try to go in the order in which I see each one of them pop up. Again, please be respectful that we are doing a 10-minute session, so after each presentation, take as few amount of minutes as you can. I'm going to limit it to about 2 minutes per. If we get more than 5, we can always carry that over into the Q&A at the end. I think that is all we need to recognize. If you're on the phone, I don't know that I see anybody on the phone, it is *9 to raise your hand. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thanks, JD. Thanks, Linnea. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for participating. What I'd like to do is start off with just some orientation regarding the metro districts and where we find ourselves today. The first point I guess I really want to make before we get started is $500,000. $500,000 a year for at least 30 years. $500,000. That's how much we're going to save by refinancing our current bond debt. $500,000. What are we going to do with that money? We should have a community conversation about that. There are a lot of options. One option is to reduce our taxes and keep the money. Another option is to invest it back into Solterra. We have several multi-million-dollar projects that are going to come up over the next 10, 15 years. Third option is pay it to Brookfield. And there's any combination of those three. There is no rush. There is no hurry. We have time to think about this and make a community decision about what we want to do with $500,000 a year for at least 30 years, 25% of what we're paying in debt right now. So how do we make the decision? I'm going to jump ahead and talk about the ballot issue that took away our right to vote. How do we make the decision? If we're going to pay Brookfield another $500,000 for at least 30 years, you, me, each one of us, all of our neighbors, everybody in the community has a right to vote on that decision. And here is the document that gives us that right is in the Colorado Constitution. You've heard TABOR, it's that Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. That says you, me, everybody in the neighborhood has a right to vote on any future bond debt. That right that we have as residents of Lakewood, residents of Jeffco, residents of the state, every time they want to raise the debt, anytime they want to keep money, they have to go to a vote. We had a vote in Lakewood, we had a vote from in Jeffco as to whether or not they wanted to keep the money. That was a vote. Same thing here. We have the right to vote on whether or not we pay that debt. That right was taken away. And here's the document that did that. Brookfield took away our right to vote.
John, real quick, sorry to interrupt you. Can you hit sharing so they can see it? I don't think you're sharing your document.
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up right now.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, good. So this is the ballot issue. that I've referred to in the blogs. This is the ballot that was passed in November of 2006. And this was the vote that was taken by 8 people. You can see them there, 8-0, 8-0 on every vote. Those 8 people were employees of Brookfield. Nobody lived here, just dirt, prairie dogs, rattlesnakes. 8 people voted, and one of the things they voted on, excuse me for scrolling, was each of these ballot issues, and each one of these ballot issues they took away our right to vote and gave it to the board. This is the kind of language, obviously, that no one would ever try to read if they didn't have to. This is legal language. You never saw this in your closing documents. The city of Lakewood never saw it. The county never sees it. But this is the critical document, and this is probably the most insidious example of the Metro District reform that we have. First, you'll see roughly in the middle of the page, they're setting the interest rate at no more, not to exceed 18%. But then they go further and they say the district can issue tax debt, can issue bond debt, and it's going to be determined, as you can see there, sorry, in the 5th line up from the bottom, it's going to be determined by the board of directors. And then they go on to say that it will be spent by the district, last line, last words, as if it was voter approved. So that's how they do it. They had an election. They voted to pass this ballot issue, 8 employees of Brookfield. And in doing so, they took away our right to vote on bond debt. And they gave it to the board. That was in 2006. The Solterra board continued to issue debt until the recall in 2017. And that debt is the $29 million that they're planning to refund. Before we issue any further debt, that right to vote that we have under the Constitution, that we exercise in the city, county, and state, should be returned to us. And that the board won't do. Unfortunately, we've asked them, and they could do it. They could do it simply by passing a resolution that says, we are not going to exercise that power. We are going to defer to the citizens and put it to the vote. They could do that on their own. They could put on the ballot a question: should we rescind? Should we take back what they did in 2006? And we can vote yes or no. Do we want to get our right to vote or not? But they won't do that. We've asked, and they refuse to do it. Here, and you don't need to take my word for it, here is a reference in the bond document. This is the 2016 bond that paid to Brookfield a little over $12 million, wrote them a check for $12 million. This was passed by the board in 2016 before the recall. And on page 66 of that document, oh, sorry. This is a document that is a prospectus. The board on the last meeting voted to pay and hire attorneys and consultants to prepare this document for the new bond issue. And what each bond says, and this is true for every bond that's been issued throughout the Front Range and over 2,000 special districts, it says at the bottom, various state constitutional and statutory provisions require voter approval prior to the incurrence of general obligation indebtedness by the districts, i.e. the bond. It goes on to say, as to Solterra, at the 2006 election, the qualified electors for each of the districts voted to issue, keep scrolling down, a repayment cost indebtedness up to 4.9, count the zeros, $billion. A little further down in that paragraph, they say, election for the issuance of indebtedness, election, the vote to issue bond debt, previously incurred obligations occurred in 2006. What they don't say here, and what they don't say to their proposed investors, is that the people who voted in 2006 were 8 employees of Brookfield, who obviously had a conflict of interest at the time. We should not be making any decisions based upon 8 employees of Brookfield who voted in 2006. There are over 2,000 residents here in Solterra. We should be making the decision, not 8 people in 2006 who worked for Brookfield. So if we cannot get the issue on the ballot, as we've asked many times, we have no choice. We have no choice. The check and balance on these metro districts and the metro district abuse, the ultimate check and balance isn't the state, it's not the city, it's not the county, it's us, it's you and me. Our vote to recall if that's what it takes. I see my time's almost up. This is just a very small piece of the metro district abuse, but again, this is the most insidious. We need our right to vote back. It was taken away from us in 2006. We can get it back, and if we have to, take the only action that's ultimately available, and that's a recall. Thank you, JD. Thank you, Linnea. Any questions?
I don't see any hands up at this time. If you would like to ask a question and you don't want to speak, you can always put it in the chat to me. If you're here just for information, that's great, and we can move on. I'll give you guys a minute or so to think about any questions for this information. Great. Mr. Don, I see you. I will unmute you now. Go ahead, Don.
Okay. So can you step back and just explain this bond process a little bit? I was always under the understanding that, you know, an investment bank issues bonds, investors buy them, we're paying money to retire those bonds, but I keep hearing that we're paying Brookfield. So can you explain the process of how the bond thing works? And I've also heard there's $60 million in bonds owed. I've heard there's 29 million. Why isn't it clear how much is owed?
Questions. Let me take the first one. You're absolutely right. When I say we're paying Brookfield, here's how it works, okay? Brookfield, apparently, we haven't seen anything in writing, but apparently Brookfield has been threatening the board with litigation if they don't issue bonds. What happens is the board today, just as the board did back in 2010 and 2016, they decide to issue the bonds to investors. The investors buy those bonds and pay, let's say, $12.5 million or $10 million, whatever the amount is. They buy those bonds, they pay that money. Where does that money go? That money goes to the board. If you follow the money in the budget, the next line item is the board takes that money that they get from the investors and they write one check to Brookfield for that amount. So the board pays Brookfield that amount that the bonds are sold for. And of course, the residents get the debt for the next 30 or 40 years. With respect to the amount, again, Brookfield has been funny with the numbers from the very beginning. When we did the recall back in 2017, we had several sit-down meetings, mediations. Brookfield was trying to persuade us to withdraw the recall so they could issue more bonds. And they said at that time, what they wanted to do was issue more bonds for $30 million. Same thing. Board issues the bonds. Investors pays the board $30 million. The board pays Brookfield $30 million, and we get the bill. Of course, we said no, and we went through with the recall, and they left. But ever since, well, even before then, they were saying, well, you owe us 60 million or 70 million or 90 million. And again, during the mediations, 30 million. I don't know what demand they've been making on the board, but the numbers with Brookfield are always changing, and it's a slippery slope. They said to the city of Lakefield that their bill for the infrastructure and everything else was $37 million. They told us in April and May of 2017, the total bill was $160 million. So they just make it up as they go along. At some point in time, we're going to have an end to this, and that will be the number, whatever it is at that time. And keep in mind, I mean, my position is we've already paid Brookfield for the infrastructure when we bought the lots, but that's another issue. The key issue right now is how are we going to make a decision about bonds, future bonds, if at all? And I respectfully submit it has to be by a vote of all the residents, just as it is in the city, the county, the state. Anyway, thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you. And we can come back to you at the end if you have a follow-up to that. So that's great. Thank you so much. We have a couple in the chat, one from Kelly. Kelly, I'll go ahead and read it for you. She says, just an FYI, Brookfield did this in my last community too. Maybe we should sue Brookfield, ? Are they acting illegally, ? Also, does it matter if the people who signed are no longer Brookfield employees? They've had a lot of turnover.
Lots of questions. The bottom line is, yes, I've been working with residents and several other Brookfield communities out in the Brighton area. And yeah, it's just the same old story, just the way they do business, unfortunately. Legal action is certainly available. Folks have talked about class actions. The way I've always viewed it, and I'm just one resident, but the way I viewed it is we take steps that we can manage and control. The first step was to recall Brookfield off of the board. That was successful. We now have 100% residents on the board. In those 2,000 communities throughout the Front Range, that's not the case. I mean, just as a result of the Post articles, people are finally waking up. We woke up. I mean, it took us 11 years to wake up, but we did. And once we took action, things started to happen. So the first step was getting the board. The second step, and I've been saying this since 2017, the second step, and the most important step, is to get our right to vote back. This is our money. These are our taxes. We should be making that decision just as we do in the city and the county and the state by a vote. And whatever the vote is, I mean, people who want to pay Brookfield can make their argument. People who don't want to pay Brookfield can make the argument. And then we get to decide, just like we do a lot of other big decisions, when we cast a ballot.
Excellent. Okay, we have 4 minutes left for this section. And just a reminder, if we don't get to your question, there are a few others. We will carry those over to the next section and into the Q&A at the end. We do have one more presentation. So I think we can get to one more. We're going to try to stop at 7 with this one. And I'm not sure, John, if you feel that this is an appropriate question for later. Scott is asking, how do we initiate a recall?
Good question. We already have. I filed because of some of the logistical inconveniences that occurred when we did it in 2017, that being that the designated election official who was going to approve our form of the petitions and then count them to make sure they were accurate was the attorney for Brookfield. That was not very comfortable. They played games, but we got through it and we succeeded, even though they counted the numbers several times trying to push them down. What the legislature did the next year was, as a result of communications I had with the court, the legislature said, okay, we need to fix this. So the new procedure is we file a petition with the court that says, Judge, please appoint a designated election official. We've asked them to appoint the Jefferson County clerk and recorder, who does the same thing for citizen initiatives, same exact thing. Certifies the petition in form and then certifies the signatures are sufficient. The board's attorney has opposed that, and they want to appoint the manager for the board, Sue Blair of CRS. I know Sue, we get along, I like Sue, but she's not a neutral party. She's paid by the board, she works for the board, she speaks for the board, she represents the board. We should have a neutral party who will certify the petition is sufficient in form and the number of signatures. So that's in front of the judge. We're expecting any minute now a decision by the judge saying she's appointed somebody to go forward, and once she does, then we have 60 days to collect at least 300 signatures from each district to put the issue on the ballot.
Great. So we are at a time here, Jim. I still see your hand, so I'm not forgetting about you. I will come back to you if that's okay. And now I'd like to pass it over to Gary, who's going to talk a little bit more, I think, about the financial side. Is that right, Gary?
That is correct. Thank you, JD. I'll make sure I share the screen properly here so I can do this and share it with everyone. Let's see, because I'm new at this, so bear with me. All right, can everybody see this?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Well, thank you, JD, and thanks for everyone for attending this evening. I want to start off with a disclaimer. It says, well, I have actively participated in Foster Ridge Metric meetings since living in Solterra, even at the days of Brookfield, and the available financial workshops that the current board has done. I do not pretend I'm an expert. The members and the numbers that you're going to see and the insights that I'll share are from Foster Ridge Metro District sources, such as that are posted on Solterra Connect and the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. So over the many years, I've had to create my own analysis to get better educated. So I'm not an expert, but I would appreciate the board to share similar insight to the residents so that we really clearly understand what's going on. And given the uniqueness of metro districts, and I came from 2 homes that weren't in metro districts, it's a big, big difference. I would encourage everyone to get better informed. All right, so the first area I want to talk about is the current bonds, and I'm not going to read all these verbatim because I think a lot of people know this, but we have 3 bonds today, 2010, 14, 16. So the total of the remaining principal is around 27,465, 52 million in P&I. So the sum of the principal of all 3 bonds initially was around 29,480. So we're now at 27,395 per what the board recently communicated a couple of weeks ago of what we're trying to refinance. So we have reduced it by 2 million, less than 7%, around 7%. So we've paid 9 million, over 9 million in interest. what does it mean to refinance? So if we do it at 3.5, now, the Finance Committee members shared here recently on an 8.3 call that Fossil Ridge virtual meeting had that refinancing of the current bond does look favorable for a 3.5. The rate's not final, and I understand that. But given the current low interest rates available in our environment and the country, it appears 3.5 rate is achievable per the individual. So if we do it for 30 years, that's around 44 million to P&I, about 1.4 million, almost 1.5 per year, with a savings of 8 million over what we still owe on the current bonds. If we do it for 40 years, the P&I is around 1.1213, savings of 1.4 million overall interest. So the board has not shared if they're recommending 30 or 40, but clearly the 30-year option, in my mind, is more prudent to save $6.6 million in less interest. I know what I would do as a fiscal responsible homeowner for my mortgage. So if 10 million is paid to Brookfield, residents probably will not see a change in their annual tax amount. But what will come if the board pursues additional payment? We've heard everything of what's still owed. They're just starting off at 10 million. So could that be the basis for leveraging 40 years to suggest to residents their taxes will not increase? I do not know that answer. I'm hoping the board will share that. So the current, I'm making a compare here of 2020 on the P&I. So the 2020 P&I is close to $2 million. If we refinance that for 30 years, we'd be close to 1.5 million in annual reduction, or close to $500,000 in annual reduction. If we did it for 40 years, it's 1.2 million, annual reduction of 700,000, but we pay 6.6 more million in added interest. So we applaud the board's commitment to refinance current bonds, for it provides a great opportunity to redirect those savings into community maintenance, because we know it's going to increase. Under Tabor, I think what's important, because we've heard a lot of different thoughts from the community about things, but under Tabor, there is no need of a resident vote to refinance at a lower rate. So we urge the board to leverage this opportunity separately from the discussion of additional payment to Brookfield. Reserve study. I really want to bring this up because we keep talking about fees, our obligation to debt. I thought the board took an excellent step in 2019 to commission a reserve study. It was completed in December of 2019, and the report projects the liability to maintain our community for many years. So for those that are not aware of where it's at, it can be found under Solterra Connect under the district reserve study. So I think, as most people know, we are now being assessed as residents $80 a quarter per home to help build a reserve fund, which I think is the right thing to do for the future. So it's around 374,000 for 2020. Aspen Reserve Specialties, the company that was contracted, recommends to the board a reserve fund of 1,700,000. So we're far short of that recommendation. So a question that I have and others might have, can we leverage savings from the bond refinancing? If so, could we meet the deficit in less than 3 years from $500,000 in savings through financing could provide? The scope of the study did not address things like sewer pipes, which we all know in the future is going to have attention. It also, in my mind, didn't address some of the challenges of the water rock feature on the tributary. And I think many of us know the area is going to require attention. I know the board has even talked about what ifs in the future. How do we really do it? So it's going to be a big burden that's on this community in the future. But I do want to state, bonds are for our obligation to debt for capital like infrastructure, capital improvements. The quarter fees we pay to maintain Solterra operationally comes from the same pockets, our residents. Can the board project overall expense obligation for at least the next 5 years? I want to see the net picture up. If we're going to recommend 10 million, you could say the taxes aren't going up, but what's going to happen to our fees next year and the next 4 or 5 years? Regional improvement projects. I bring this up only because metro districts are kind of unique in that they're a convenient way to fund other improvements in our environment. So the regional improvements are really things that happen outside the boundaries of Fossil Ridge or Solterra. They call them regional improvements. Projects that we all know, I-470 Alameda Bridge, Water, McIntyre, Yale, they were all identified in the service plan as needs of how we use that money and the taxation of Solterra residents to help with these get done. So the 2000 service plan projected over $29 million as the cost that Fossil Ridge Metro District would be the source of the funds. But it also states that there's an allocation specifically for Fossil Ridge Metro District to $10,500,000. So as I mentioned, regional improvements, the convenient way for developers.
Did we lose Gary?